Hey, welcome to another podcast with Mandy and Olly. We're going to talk about a juicy topic today. This came up, actually, it's come up multiple times through this week. First off was with Olly's mindset call, which we do once a month inside our program. And then I brought this topic up with our pods, which are small groups of our longer term clients yesterday, really for a discussion. And it brought up some really interesting points we want to go through. And it's this topic of self-sabotage when it comes to changing any type of habits that we are looking to build to improve our health, our fitness, or any of these sorts of things. Many of us run into this issue where it might look like procrastination, or it might look like kind of backing away from when it gets hard, or it can come in many different forms. But this self-sabotage is a big topic, and it was really interesting diving into it with these ladies because we've had some really good discussions before about this topic. It comes up and actually just asking them what it means to them, how it shows up for them. And then we broke it down, and this was primarily based on this key line, Olly, that you had in your mindset call on Monday, which was self-sabotage is not laziness, it's simply the nervous system protecting what is familiar. And I said that to the ladies on the call because some of them hadn't seen that training, and it was like a light bulb went off and they all just nodded. They're like, and as we went through this discussion, I guess what we kind of landed on a lot was that it was a really nice way, a self-compassionate way, in a way of reframing self-sabotage away from being a character flaw or a fault that we have to something that actually we can just simply recognize, acknowledge, and then move past. Like, it kind of gives you the power back. You know, a lot of people say, oh, I always self-sabotage, or they become a victim to this big kind of overwhelming belief that they are someone who self-sabotages. But if we realize that actually it's just our nervous system keeping us safe, it shows up when we're on the edge of something new, then we can be like, oh, I knew this was coming and this is how I'm going to move past it. And it kind of led to some really cool discussions just on how it shows up for people, how we can address it, how we can break it down. So yeah, that was a very great start point to the week, Olly. But give me your thoughts.
Yeah,
Having taken that call recently.
yeah. Well, you brought up a cool point, which I think is the when you can remove judgment from what feels like a character flaw and just start to learn a pattern that's been there before, you can just be a lot more exploratory. And in the
Mm.
same way that we want to be exploratory in regards to how we feel a muscle and what foods we feel good on, sometimes we miss the same ability to do that mentally. And that mental chatter is always the biggest part of it, while also being the least tangible. So it's the hardest to really put your finger on, right? But when you do, and you get to that space where, I guess a larger percentage of each year, I spend more and more on that space of behavior change and that sort of mental chatter element, and less so on the nutrition, because the nuts and bolts of that won't change too much. The way to stay on track through the good and the bad is ultimately more of a mental game. And I think being able to give yourself that a judgment-free zone in order to make the tweaks and adjustments. And as we've talked about on many of those calls, it's not a today was a failure, what's my next meal look like? That type of logical rationale only comes in when you remove the judgment of I'm such a terrible person because I ate chips. Like, don't add that. There's no reason to add the
Yeah.
noise of I failed. You haven't. You just had a meal out and you're human, and that's what happens in life. And I think being able to look at this through that lens of self-sabotage, which is becoming quite a common label in itself, it can actually be quite unhelpful. And while I've kind of deterred away from using the word, I also want to make sure that we use language that our clients are using. So
Mhm.
using that word and then redefining it for our clients is, as you said, that sort of shift away from it being a character flaw and instead identifying where we're protecting the familiar. And that nervous system being such an unconscious state that our body's in every day is something that the more we can be aware of, the more we can change our habits.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, I think it was really interesting. Two different sides of the spectrum. One lady was talking about how making these changes to building this new fitness and training and food habit for her, she'd find herself going along and doing really well. And then as soon as she'd sort of see herself progressing, she would stop doing the actions that were taking her forward. And she's like, when I really think about it, it's this deep underlying, and she recognized that she also does it in her business as well, where her first response to when she gets, a big offer or a big project on the table is, I can't do this. And she's like, the root cause there, that root nervous system response is protecting me from this thing that I think I'm not good enough to do. or I won't succeed at. So it's protecting her from that kind of failure piece. And I think I agree. I don't like putting labels on things when even diagnoses or things like that, because you quickly become a victim to the label you give yourself. And if you label yourself as a self-sabotager, every time it happens, you're like, oh, there I go again,
Yeah.
self-sabotaging. When you recognize it is just a thing that can occur, and this is what the trigger is, now I get to choose whether I live under that label or don't.
Yeah.
And I think this is where the conversation was super powerful. And the other angle on that was a woman who also, same thing, building these fitness habits, building these food habits, starts to have some success and then stops, not necessarily because she thinks she can't, but because she's a little bit worried about who she's becoming and what changes that will mean. She's like, I read all these stories about people who, lose all this weight and then suddenly they're changing jobs and moving countries and getting a new friends group. And she's like, I don't know that I want it. That scares me. It's like, you don't have to do that.
Yeah, before you get abs, you must move to Dubai. It's not really yeah,
Yes, you got to preach
locking those
it.
down. Yeah, just
Yeah.
coming back to that first point though, of maybe it's more of a masculine and feminine energy. One of the research studies I read a long time ago, and it really stuck with me, was how different that sort of masculine versus feminine approach can be to, say, applying for a job, right? Like
Mm.
masculine or energy might be, I can see one of those six things that I can do, so I'll apply for the job, right?
Yeah.
The feminine is like, unless I can do all six, I won't apply because I don't know if I'll be good enough, right? And I think there's a real self-auditing of the sort of blundering through and seeing if I'll fix it kind of scenario, which is potentially the fear of failure. You're just going to add some intensity and just drive, and hopefully you don't go backwards. So there's still a
Mm.
fear there, but it's different versus the fear of that lack of capacity, that fear of success in some form, where
Mm.
you haven't quite fully outlined what that person would look like on the other side, so you won't take the first step unknowingly. To you, that character is obviously built as you walk across, right? And I think
Yeah.
both of those are inhibitors, but it's just a case of, in many cases, it comes back to the perfectionism being so tightly linked to self-sabotage, because it is well, if I can't do it 100%, I'm not even going to start. Or I've got down this journey and I know that this is now a point where I've got uncomfortable before, so I'm just going to step back a little bit. I'm not going to go past that point, right? So that's that sort of invisible ceiling that we start to put in. And as you said, we can use self-sabotage and be like, oh, that was self-sabotage. I'm like, it looks like self-sabotage, but it's you deciding to stop at this point and protecting your current ego or ceiling.
Yeah. I think that's the thing is there's no problem with recognizing the behavior pattern,
Yeah,
but the problem is if you choose not to go past it. Like,
totally.
oh, that was self-sabotage that stopped me there. Cool, I'm going to lean in right now and
Yeah.
conquer this thing. And I think the point is those patterns will probably always show up because our nervous system is always there in the background, being pinged and fired, I guess, by all sorts of different associations, and it's always trying to keep us safe. So it is a little bit like whack-a-mole in that we might be crushing in one area and self-sabotage might be showing up in another. But the more you build that muscle of, oh, this showed up and I pushed past anyway, the easier it is to conquer that each time,
Mm.
rather than becoming a victim to it.
Yeah, and just to step back on this team, we've kind of really dove in on the deep end on this. Hopefully, you're keeping up with our chat. But as an observation of the last sort of 10 years of, I'd say, personal development away, Mandy, I think a lot of people, and I'm seeing this now with my sister as well, who's kind of very much getting into that space, you kind of initially start to understand labels, right? You start to understand these diagnoses of thyroid or
Mhm.
depression or self-sabotage, right? And you can start to identify labels, and it's helpful to be able to start to consolidate human behavior into certain spaces.
Yeah.
But then, as you know, a label can be as detrimental as it can be positive. So that shift from labels, and you start to realize how unhelpful it is. And I think I went completely the other direction and said, I'll never use any labels again
Yeah.
because, I don't want to be confined by X, Y, and Z, right? And I think
Mm.
both of those are a development down the process of, one, identifying human behavior, two, then not wanting to be defined by it, and then third, kind of having a collective understanding of directionally I'm heading in this way. And I
Mm.
heard from a guy the other day that was a really nice kind of balance of the two, I felt, which is, this feels like burnout. It's not burnout, but it feels like you're in that trajectory. There's some behaviors that are occurring that feels in that direction, right?
Mhm.
And I think that's kind of the perfect complement towards something like self-sabotage. It's the same way of saying, I stuffed this meal, or I had deep fried food for this meal. Fact, I'm a failure. emotion, right? Like that
Yeah.
part's not available. That sounds like you're beating yourself up, right? It's not saying like you are this person and you'll never change, but that sounds like something that could be unhelpful. And
Mm,
maybe we're going down the deep realms of psychology here, but I think being able to kind of have that understanding of human behavior without being defined by it is kind of what we're talking about. And I think that's where personally my deterrence towards using the word self-sabotage has been unhelpful. But at the same time, at least the observation this year has been that if it's that common, we at least need to be able to approach it where people are at and then
mm,
start to build some patterns out of it, right? And I think that's where these
mm.
sort of phrases of we're now identifying the removal of those that laziness label or the character flaw label or this is just who I am and
Mm.
helping them get out from underneath it while also still observing that it is a thing.
Yeah, yeah. It's simply a pattern that you follow. It's nothing to do with who you are.
Yeah, nice way to
Mm,
summarize it. So ultimately what we're looking at here is the kind of old versus new you, right? And I think there's a nice little image of that sort of epiphany bridge or gap that we're looking at right between who we are now and where we're going. And I think
mm,
that's a exploration in many unknowns, but at the same time it's just we've talked about this plenty of times where it's giving yourself a reasonable amount of time before you'll be good at something, right? Like if you didn't start walking on your first go, you didn't go, right, well, that's me. I'm just going to crawl for the rest of my life. That you gave yourself an ability to kind of get better. And, I talked about this on our recent Duolingo chat
mm.
around sort of going through the learning of a language can feel very confronting in regards to just being able to say a word with a mouth that doesn't move in the right way. I'm like, can I even speak?
Yeah,
Um,
my tongue doesn't do
yeah,
that.
exactly. So being able to like go down that pathway of all of the language that comes through, we had a really productive discussion around what sort of judgment comes through of being like, oh well, that wasn't good enough, so I'm going to give up. Versus I'm gonna come back tomorrow and try again, right? And I think there's such a subtlety, and I still haven't fully packaged that in the way of really understanding because I think it's always an ebb and flow. It's never completely perfect because if you didn't care, you'd never start. You kind of need to have enough discomfort in order to want to push, right? And I
Mm,
think it's always that funny balance between contentment with where you are and the discomfort to sort of move forward and
yeah.
enjoying that process. So, I don't know if we'll ever fix that one entirely, but being able to really give yourself space to understand what are you really afraid of, and that's such a hard question to ask them. But if you had to put yourself in one of those two categories, if you were to fail at what you currently do, is there an internal shift in like, yeah, I'm really scared of going backwards, so I push so hard to never have to look behind me?
Mm,
Or am I finding that I keep butting up against a certain level of progress? I get 6 weeks into something and then I find a way to just completely blow it up and then start again. Maybe it's you haven't taken that time to really define where you're going and what that person looks like. And again, it doesn't need to be that you need to be a millionaire in Dubai to make that change. It
yeah.
might just be that you eat slightly healthier for breakfast and it's defined how you fuel yourself a bit differently. And I
Mm,
think being able to just, ironically, in a lot of ways, that's the same thing, right? This idea of being a gym person, there's such a my version of like the gym person, it becomes this guy that's got a protein shaker in one hand, he's got a stupid, stringer singlet on, and this big, gym bag slinged over to the side. Like that's not my version of a gym identity. Otherwise, I wouldn't be very motivated by it, right?
yeah.
But being able to kind of find that version of you that feels fit, healthy, kind of has that level of role model or leadership that you aspire to have, you can just kind of allow that to be your own defined version of how do you see yourself and where are you going. And I think
Mm,
that's a space that we spend a bit of time on. It's a space that uh, allows you to, I think, directly highlight the areas of self-sabotage that you might be butting up against. Is just like, what does this really look like? What does that day look like? How do I feel? How do I look? How do I function? And
mm,
when that starts to become that ripple effect, like we talked about, which was actually quite a popular episode 1 or 2 weeks ago, around what does that look like for your kids? How do they see
mm,
you? And what's that role model depict? And being able to kind of have those tie together of, I now can see that the version of myself that I'm working towards is the same best version of the dad or the mother or the role model that that kid or otherwise is looking up to. I think that can be a really inspiring, very powerful way of kind of combining the two. You've got your own
mm,
personal pride, and you've got that respect of a individual looking up to you as well.
mm. Yeah, two really good points there. I think that when we're looking, we only know what we see, right? So if what you see, like, so you're working on health and wellness goals, and that's completely new to you, and you see that version of a gym bro that you described, that's you're like, I want to be fit and healthy, but I don't want to be that.
Yes.
It's kind of a case of finding who the you version of that is. Like, you're not going to look like that. You're not going to be like that. You don't even have to. You can be fit and healthy and not do that. But it's kind of like identifying on the way, what does this look like for me? Not for anyone else, but actually for me. But the other part of it that I think is really important is the slow, gradual change of that. And this is something we talked about yesterday on pods, is that nervous system protecting us and keeping us safe from something is about something that's truly we've internalized. And my example for this is a bit of a story, is, and everyone has this, I think, can probably resonate. We're all scarred by running cross country in school, right? I don't know many people that really liked it, and it kind of writes into your brain that I don't like being active, I don't like doing that stuff, I don't want to do that, and so I'll avoid that feeling at all costs. And so then when you're an adult and you're like, actually, you know what, to be healthy I do need to do some form of exercise, that comes into your mind, and so your response is not going to do that, don't want to do that. And my kind of story here was that when I first started thinking about I actually need to build some exercise habits into my day-to-day life, at the time my sister was getting into boot camps and spewing and doing all the things that they do stupid boot camps, and I was just like, I'm just not going there. I do not
Yeah.
want to do that. Like, I had a visceral reaction to it, and it took a different path for me to find what I found was useful and enjoyable in order to get into a habit. And I think that the conversation that we had with the ladies is that self-sabotage will show up when it's protecting you, and you can make it harder, you can make it easy. Not that it's easy, because you're still changing a habit, but don't go to the ugliest version of the thing you need to do and try and do that. Like, that's just that kind of discipline, stick it out type thing. Find the thing that works and just scale a habit that you've started at least. Don't try and start with the hardest version, because that self-sabotage is going to show up real powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there is a second part to that, because I was that annoying guy that enjoyed cross country. So this is funny. This is kind of the other side.
Well, we have a different.
Not because I was actually particularly good at running. I was so hyperactive. Anything that was running outdoors was better, and because it was more of a rural school, we ended up running through farms and things rather than just round around a park, which probably made it much nicer.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think there's a certain amount of us that will also have the judgment of what we used to be able to do and we can't do now. And I've certainly had that apparent shift where it's like, I'm not made of rubber or magic anymore. I need to actually warm up
Mhm.
and I need to give myself an adequate amount of time of rest and fuel and all these things. And I think that in itself can kind of be a bit of I think certainly on the male side, for anyone listening there, there's going to be a bit of a hit to the ego towards that capacity of, it's naive to think you can just jump into a gym and go back to doing pull-ups. Like, you're going to feel really heavy and you're going to feel like you're holding this sort of heavy suit that doesn't quite move like it did before. And I
Mm.
think being able to kind of, again, it's where that compassionate lens comes in. But as you said, sort of scaling micro habits, start with something that you can do daily and build it up. It just,
Mm.
there's so much reflection in why you won't do the thing, because logically you say you go back to the gym, but the second part to that is you're protecting it, because as soon as you go to that gym and you feel way out of shape, you know how uncomfortable that feels as well. So it is really leading back to this reasonable amount of time to get back into things and just look at this over longer timelines. And that's really tough. It's really easy to say and really tough to do, because same way we'd look at in the investing world or anything financial. This is a quote I keep coming back to, and a bit of a tangent, but I'll bring it up, is like some of the best personal run investment accounts are people that have invested into S&P 500 and then just lost their password and not being able to access something for 20 years, right? Like the people that just don't tinker with shit, right? Whereas the people that are trying to be proactive and trying to day trade and trying to switch things around to beat markets and things, they always stuff it up. And I think being able to understand how much that sort of overactivity, as opposed to
Mhm.
just doing less but doing better, ties into this just as much. It's managing the emotional state in the meantime. And I
Mm.
think, as you said, with a 10-minute walk, it's like, well, I haven't dropped abs yet. I'm like, well, what do you mean? We're doing 10 minutes a day. But at the same time, do you want to really be in a place that you are now strong, fit, healthy, all these things, and you can stay that way for 20 years? And I think that one of the phrases that I was surprised didn't come up a little bit more was this idea of shifting away from intensity and moving towards identity. And it sounds a bit sort of gimmicky when said out loud, but I think it really is quite powerful, because there's so many of us that really, when we come from the space of being a high performer or all or nothing, we can do something very intense for 6 weeks and then we fizzle out, we start again in 6 months, and we go again. And that ultimately is the pinnacle of a lack of patience, because you want abs after the second workout. When you don't get it after the fifth, you stop and you try it again in 6 months when it's even harder. Whereas if you are just chipping away, it's a really nice way to look at that sort of separation of, if I said to someone, do this for 5 years and you'll be in shape for the rest of your life, they'd be like, is that worth doing? I'm like, yes, I know. If I just do this for a period of time and I'm in shape and I can never have to worry about this again, I will do it. The trouble is people just repeat the same 90 days over and over again, trying to get abs, yesterday, and they just completely diminish, as we know, from a metabolic rate and general cellular health and all sorts of things, are going to make that process so much harder to maintain long term. So it's a very clear depiction, I guess, of why I spend so much time on the mental side of things. Because when we look at the physical, I'm not saying it's simple, but there are some steps that need to be done on a consistent basis that simply don't get done. And if we never do anything beyond a 90-day target, we can talk about self-sabotage, but we probably also need to talk about patience in the same line of thinking, because it is that case of what are we doing on a consistent basis and what time period are we expecting that to pay off?
I think patience is such an important piece in that, right? I think the other thing is actually just, and you kind of touched on this, you can obsess over it, or you can forget the password and just do the action on repeat,
Yeah.
right? There's that saying about where attention goes, energy flows. Like if you sit in that moment of, oh, I stuffed up again and I need to go back to the start and I need to start over or whatever, you're just whirlwinding in this kind of crap storm of negativity. Like just remove yourself and
Yeah.
move on.
Yeah.
And that patience piece of just show up and do the thing, show up and do the thing. Once it becomes so uh, rote, i.e., you don't even need to think about it. Your body does the thing because there's that muscle memory there of this is just what I do. Then you add another thing onto that. And 5 years from now, you suddenly have abs and you don't even think about it. Well, maybe you don't suddenly have abs, but you have this, you have a health and a body composition and all that you would have one day dreamed of because you've been building those habits over time. So I think, yeah, I think patience is huge.
Yeah. The final step I'll bring up, which you just sort of mentioned there, was this idea of uh, this is what hard feels like, right? Like when you get into a level of discomfort, you get into a space where you're kind of familiar with that feeling. I think that's a really rewarding feeling. And one of the guys I brought up in this particular mindset chat was a guy called Jesse Itzler, done very well in the business space. He's also a bit of a mad runner. And he was talking in a particular reel around like people sign up for a 100-mile run and then they get 30 miles in and quit because it gets hard. And like, what did you expect was going to happen? It's going to be hard. And sort of that discussion through, if you sign up to making a change to your health, you sign up to, building a new business, you sign up to having kids, like it's
Mm,
going to be hard, right? Like
mm,
getting to that place, being in that moment and being able to pause and say, this is what hard feels like, can be that difference between you beating yourself up and making all this other extra unnecessary crap storm, as you used,
mm,
internally, which just makes everything harder externally as well,
mm,
versus being like, oh, well, that's where I'm at, what took you so long, this is the pain, this is where I'm at, I'm going to lean into it. And I think that sort of ability to welcome in that level of discomfort in some form
mm,
can be a really nice way of allowing it to be the character building opportunity that you hoped it would be, right? Like if you want to be a person that's strong, respected, smart, fit, etc., he's probably going to have to go through, or he or she is going to have to probably go through some shit to have the character traits, right? Like we all know someone's that's been given everything and is complete drip because they just don't have that. They're wrapped in bubble wrap, right? They haven't done anything hard, and that
mm,
doesn't create a good character. So being able to get to that spot where you can welcome that hardness, you can welcome that ability to develop your character in some form and look at that as an opportunity of actually seeking the things you're after, rather than saying, oh, this is tough, I'm going to retreat back to where I was before, which is also hard, by the way. You just get to choose which hard you work with,
yeah,
the hard of getting better or the hard of staying at the exact same spot for 10 years. And I
yeah.
think just being able to look at that space and just pause and collect yourself in that space of um, done that plenty of times where being able to be like, oh yeah, no, I'm definitely in the pit here, and I'm noticing that my language isn't going to make this any better. So let's ride this one out. And I
Mm.
think being able to use that, it ties right back to the whole judgment piece as well. But it's just allowing yourself to be present in that moment, be where your feet are. Of like, this is discomfort, and this is where we're at.
Mm. I wrapped up our calls yesterday with a question to everyone that was on them with what is an area where this is showing up for you at the moment that you're kind of, there is some self-sabotage showing up and you're retreating.
Hmm.
What's the driver there and where is it? What can you do to lean into that? hard rather than retreat from it. How do you conquer it? How do you take that next step and say, oh, that's right, I've been waiting for this. I knew this was going to show up. I knew this was going to be challenging, but I'm going to push through it anyway. And it's a nice way of kind of taking that thing which we've once been a victim to and being like, right, I'm here to party with you and I'm going to conquer you this time and we're going
Yep.
to move faster. And you won't get it right every time, right? But it's just kind of being aware of, this is when I get to push. This is when I get to go hard.
Yeah, and if nothing else, guys, one of the observations we've seen from the thousands of people we work with is the people that are a little bit more stubborn tend to just age better because they just don't let themselves get old, right? And I think if you just sit back and accept that you got old and sit on the couch, you get old real quick, right? Where if you give yourself that time to be like, no, damn it, I'm going to keep doing pull-ups at 60, like we're getting a whole lot of women to do at the moment, and getting, redefining a lot of their physical limits and beliefs, you keep yourself young a lot longer. So I think it's worthwhile.
Totally.